Good morning, everyone. Apologies for us starting the webinar a couple of minutes late. Let's wait just a second while you get accommodated and get your sound and audio settings adjusted for Zoom. I see there's still people jumping in, so I'll wait just for a couple of minutes more before we start. Excellent. I think we can get going. I see there's still people joining us, but while we're doing our introductions, I think we should all be settled when we get started with the presentation. So welcome everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone from wherever you're joining us from. I'm Johanna Siljakus. I work for the Transport Sector Office at the Asian Development Bank. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, which is called E-Mobility as a Driver for Change Towards a Gender Transformative and Just Transition to Electric Mobility. And today we're here presentations from both Annika Berlin from UNEP and Deliani Siregar from ITDP Indonesia. But just before we get started, I'd like to mention that this webinar is organized under the umbrella of the E-Mobility Support and Investment Platform for Asia and the Pacific, which is a platform that aims to build capacity and support the scale-up of financing of e-mobility initiatives. So the platform is operated by ADB, co-implemented by UNEP and co-financed by GEF, the Global Environment Facility. And if we can have the next slide, please. So if you would like to join the e-mobility community under the platform, so to receive emails and stay up to date on our activities, you can fill in this assessment survey that we have and leave us your contact details there. The QR code is available on the screen, and we'll share a link to the survey in the chat as well. And the survey is very helpful for us as well to identify any gaps and needs in the region and opportunities as well in terms of e-mobility. And if we can have the next slide, please. So usually we arrange webinars every 2 weeks as part of this webinar series. But actually our next one will already be next week. That was due to unforeseen circumstances that we had to cancel our last webinar by Arif Faisal from UNDP. So we're pleased to have him present next week instead on the Bangladesh case of EV adoption. We'll share the registration link to that one, and we have other webinars upcoming as well, as you can see on the screen. We'll share registration links to those as well in the chat. So yeah, so that was the introduction for today. Now we will jump into the topic. So I'll hand over to Tom Fleming. He's an associate from Integrated Transport Planning, our implementing partner, and he will be moderating today's session. So Tom, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Hello, everybody. Good to see you here for another e-mobility webinar. To begin with a few house rule slides. So as usual, microphones will remain muted throughout today's session, unless you are invited to speak, in which case we can unmute them during the Q&A. And if you have any questions for either of our speakers today, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I will pick them up as part of the moderated Q&A session, and we'll deal with them there. We do have. I will say that we are running this session in 2 parts. We have 2 speakers with 2 presentations. So we will take each in turn, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. So please do post questions in the Q&A as and when they cross your mind, and we'll pick them all up at the end. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, we have 2 speakers for today's session. Firstly, I would like to introduce Annika Berlin. Annika is Program Management Officer within the Sustainable Mobility Unit at the United Nations Environment Programme. She has over 14 years experience working with development institutions around the world, and she currently leads the Africa e-mobility sport and investment platform, as well as the global working group on 2- and 3-wheelers. and Annika oversees UNEP's work on gender and e-mobility. Following Annika, we will have Deliani Siregar. Deliani is an urban planner and inclusivity manager at ITDP Indonesia, where she specializes in gender, equity, disability, and social inclusion. Deliani has led various inclusive urban transport projects in Indonesia, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan, focusing on just transitions for vulnerable people. So to kick us off, Annika will be sharing key insights from UNEP's global report on gender and e-mobility. And following Annika, Deliani will introduce us to the findings of a national study on gendered aspects of e-mobility in Indonesia, which formed part of that global study. So without further ado, Annika, I'll hand over to you to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Hi, can you confirm that you can see the slide?
Yes, I can, Annika.
Okay. Perfect, thanks. Yeah, hi, thanks a lot to both Tom and Johanna for the invitation to speak on this ADB webinar in the context of the Support Investment Platform for E-Mobility. I was introduced already, so very nice to see everyone. In this webinar, this presentation, I'm going to speak about the project that we named E-Mobility as a Driver for Change towards a gender transformative and just transition to e-mobility. And later then we'll dive into a few sort of case studies. So just a brief overview over this project, which is being made possible with support from the German government. The project is sort of set up as in four main outputs. One is on data availability and sort of closing the knowledge gap on the topic of gender and mobility. The second one is looking into how we can mainstream gender topics across different national, local, and global e-mobility projects. Then the third component is focused on capacity building, pilot projects, so basically testing some of the assumptions we've made under the and findings we have made under the first two parts of the project in several countries, and the countries you can see them on the slide. It's oh, I'm not pulling forward. Let me see. Here on this slide, sorry. The countries are Colombia, Ecuador, Latin America, Uganda and Kenya in Africa, and then Vietnam and Indonesia in Asia. So we'll later hear about the work that has been done in Indonesia. And then the first component is basically taking all of these three things together and sharing them globally, reaching out to partners, share the knowledge, establish partnerships also to see how we can address whatever challenges we have found in the work across the other three components globally, and see also how we can take some of the learnings from these 6 sort of pilot countries to other, we call replication countries, and also to sort of disseminate across, especially now the Global E-Mobility Program, which is funded partly by the GEF, which currently is supporting around 60 countries globally with the transition to e-mobility. So in this presentation, I'm just going to brief.
Sorry, Annika, to interrupt. There is a box in front of the text, the title at the slide. I don't know if you can move it so we can see what that one.
Is this better?
Yes, yes. Now we can see the full slide. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for letting me know. Yes, okay. And then I'm briefly going to talk about sort of this, what Tom mentioned, this overall e-mobility baseline report, which we've done so far under the first output of the project. So here, the objective was basically to develop a baseline to see sort of what's now with the transition to e-mobility as a new technology in the transport sector, or newish, what that means for women, and how can we sort of shape this transformation to be more inclusive and just, and promote sort of overall the interests of women. And this sort of first baseline report was basically to try to aggregate all the knowledge that's around and putting it into one document. And sort of analyze the findings so that people also have sort of an idea what the current state is, and that sort of supposedly help then to better design projects to be inclusive and we call gender transformative, meaning basically not only acknowledging that there are different roles for women in the sector, but also seeing how can projects be done to really change the role that women play in the sector. And this report is complemented by an online database where we sort of listed all the different documents and sources that we came across, which can be case studies from different countries, from companies that have done a great job in integrating gender into their e-mobility work, which can be governments that have really groundbreaking gender policies in that sort of helped the sector. Yes, and then on the next slide, I just have basically the outline of the report. So we've done so far 7 reports. One is a global report, that's the one I'm presenting, and then we have 6 country reports that are sort of looking more into on the local level, on the evidence-based and knowledge barriers. I have to disclose, okay, we know, of course, we acknowledge gender is sort of a multifaceted concept. It's not men and women, but for this report right now, mainly also because of the issues with data availability, we're focused on the differences between men and women in this case. And we have analyzed the challenges for women along 4 key dimensions, which is the user perspective, the worker's perspective, the perspective of women as entrepreneurs and decision makers. And we've done a bit of a review of the global EV market, and the report focuses especially on the role of e-mobility in low and middle income countries across the globe. And sort of, it was mainly done a literature review. We also had a survey with around 180 responses from experts in the field. And then we have also used sort of the findings from some of our country projects around the globe, where the inclusion of gender is very important. And we have established a global gender and e-mobility working group that sort of should give a bit of feedback and validation of the findings. Yes, and then briefly on the evidence-based, sort of some of the main findings, nothing too surprisingly. So it's I mean, general in the transport sector, we know data is not always collected gender disaggregated by gender. And overall data collection is not sort of very comprehensive at many levels. And often we don't see that it's aggregated also by technology, basically, if it's now an ICE vehicle, an electric vehicle, and so on. So that makes it very challenging actually to draw conclusions on the issue of gender. And much of the data and e-mobility is actually in the private domain rather than with governments. So it's much more difficult to access. We sort of generally found that there is a need sort of including gender experts in general in the transport sector in the projects, basically to make sure that the topic is addressed comprehensively. There is so far a little evidence that sort of vehicles are specifically designed to cater for women, that services are specifically catered for women, that charging infrastructure is designed to be gender inclusive. When we see this is a big sort of opportunity. And there is a bit of a bias already upstream in R&D, because often women are less sort of qualified in sort of science and technology subjects in ICT, which means they're also less involved in the design of these new technologies, and also in the use of like sort of new technologies. So this creates already like a bit of a gap upstream in e-mobility. And then basically now I'm just going to talk briefly about the 4 angles of that we have used for the analysis of e-mobility, starting with the perspective of the users. So the main challenges sort of we found that, I mean, most of you are very familiar with the transport sector. So in general, the challenges for women accessing mobility services is similar with e-mobility. It doesn't change so much if it's now fueled by electricity or fossil fuels, but women face challenges because of gender-based violence, because services are more targeted to people that have 8 to 5 jobs, that have, you know, singular trips from home to work and back, and not so much of these sort of dispersed trips that women have due to their care responsibilities. High prices of EVs are an additional barrier, because often women or lower income groups don't have also access to finance to procure vehicles. We see that shared modes are mainly used by women, so public transport in general. So there's a big opportunity of, if you improve public transport for women, it will, and move to e-mobility, it will benefit women specifically. Many electric vehicles, we often see they're not designed specifically for women's needs. So we see, for example, often some of the two-wheelers are heavier because of the batteries, they might be higher, so women can't access them. But on the other side, we also see, you know, an emergence of sort of light electric bicycles that are very well suited to women's needs. Women are, based on some surveys, mainly in Europe, more worried about charging. They don't want to run out of electricity somewhere, you know, in remote areas and be then dependent on someone to help them to move forward. But in general, we see that women are more conscious about environmental topics. So that is sort of an opportunity for companies, if they address e-mobility companies, if they address women more as customers, it might accelerate the uptake of electric vehicles. And then on the workers' side, I think this is a very key area. Women are in general sort of less, I mean, let me show this slide first. So we see that women are in general only presenting less than a quarter of the workforce in the transport sector across all areas, especially though in the technical fields, though the data is not so clear because it's not disaggregated by profile, but in general, there are around 18% women working in the transport sector. And on the same, but even though we find that there's many open positions in the transport sector, mainly for truck and bus drivers, and it would sort of be a good opportunity to make these jobs attractive for women, to fill sort of this gap in employment. And currently women only present 6% of drivers in the workforce. And that is very similar across both high and low income countries. And a big gap is, for example, for women to be able to access or obtain public service driver's licenses. And then if I now go back sort of, to the main challenges for women as workers. So as I said before, women often don't have the qualifications in sort of these more technical fields that are needed for the sector. I said that only for every 100 men, there's only 62 women who are considered green talent. And that is sort of, there was a study done by both ILO and IEA, sort of the need for green skills to access sort of all these new jobs around renewable energy and e-mobility. And of course, they're very closely linked. So it's sort of important to provide the right skill set. And then, of course, there are the general things about, you know, work-life balances, job security, childcare facilities, whatever, that makes it more difficult for women to enter these jobs. Often there's many stereotypes around the transport sector because there are men, there's sort of this perception that women, you know, are not good to work in this sector. And also, I think in many countries, the issue is that transport often is informal jobs. The jobs are not very well seen, pure image. So that also sort of doesn't make it very attractive for women to enter the sector. I think there's an opportunity with now the shift to e-mobility, to sort of make the conditions in the sector better, so that it is attractive for women to work in the industry. And then the slide I've shown. Then the other perspective is on decision making, where we see in general that there are few women in leadership roles. That's not only in e-mobility, that's not only in transport, that's also in energy, but that's a sort of global issue, I'd rather say. No, we saw it at the last COP that actually very few women are represented as leaders from their countries. We see it in ministries of transport, in ministries of energies, and ministries of finance. So of course, if they're not the ones taking the decisions on new policies, they're also usually less gender inclusive in general. But there's of course an opportunity now with sort of new bodies being established around e-mobility that from the beginning we try to promote that, for example, in all our projects, that women are equally represented in these sort of decision-making bodies around e-mobility. Again, I think also when now sort of international donors give grants or support e-mobility companies, we could, for example, give preference to them companies that are founded by women or that have women in their leadership team, because right now, I think, it's there, only 8% of all executives in the leading automotive companies are women. And sort of this new shift towards newer companies could provide an entry point. And for that, we need opportunities for networking and mentorship. Then the last dimension is the one on entrepreneurs, where now, as I said before, there's sort of new companies coming up, and women could sort of take the lead. But the problem there is access to financing. So there's some studies that was done by IFC that said only, I think, 2% of venture capital funding goes to companies founded by women. On that side, like found companies, and then on the other issue is women, for example, as sort of commercial e-mobility drivers. For that, they would need access to credit to, of course, obtain a vehicle and use it, and there often they have a less credit history or no collateral to get these vehicles, and that prevents them then from taking up these jobs. And the other issue is that due to their care responsibilities, they're often not able to work, let's say, the whole day or even longer. We see it with many sort of, gig economy drivers, that to actually really make a profit, you need to work really long hours. And that is often not possible due to family duties. And then the other issue is the lack of sort of networks and know-how on how to on the one side access financing, but also to build up new companies and connect with the right investors to promote their businesses. So those were the sort of main areas. And then we sort of, based on that, we have developed some key recommendations across these 4 areas. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just briefly. So we have sort of one set of recommendations for governments and decision makers, where it's mainly to make sure that e-mobility is not seen just as a new technology, but part of a sort of general shift to sustainable mobility, which includes, walking, cycling, improvement of public transport, improvement of how we plan the city, sort of this integrated perspective. Make sure that women are equally represented in, all the decision-making areas. Establish mechanisms for coordination across different sectors, and then make sure that, for example, ministries of women's affairs or social affairs are included in these mechanisms. Create awareness that this is an important topic. Data collection, I think that's very key. So we make sure that if we now collect new data on e-mobility, let's make sure from the beginning on that this data is disaggregated by gender, to make sure we can sort of fully understand these dimensions. Promote capacity building and knowledge sharing, and work especially also with NGOs that are much closer to sort of the beneficiaries and people on the ground that need sort of access to better and cleaner mobility. Then the second set of recommendations is for users. So I think e-mobility has an opportunity to make transport more equitable, because it can be cheaper to operate, it's mainly cheaper to operate electric vehicles, so it can make transport more affordable. And I think especially electric bicycles, light electric 2- and 3-wheelers, have a potential to provide access for women to mobility, which they didn't have before. There's a big role sort of in designing these vehicles to be or to provide better services, and also now with, for example, the shift to moving maybe from ICE minibuses to electric BRT systems. Like I think my colleague in Jakarta, they have done a great job on that. It of course makes the service better and safer for women, and hopefully improves their mobility. And then to sort of make sure that at the same time, even though maybe the electric buses are more expensive, that we're not making the transport more expensive for women, or reduce the service frequency to adapt to different charging needs. So I think this perspective has to be included. And then the other set is focusing on research and academia, because that's sort of not the groundwork. So to make sure that certain degree programs in engineering and technology are sort of more attractive to women, that universities and technical institutes are proactive in recruiting women to these sectors, that, for example, donor agencies can help, give grants to women to take up formal training around e-mobility, battery engineering, and sort of promote these subjects to women. And then also create sort of new programs that are designed gender transformative from the beginning, sort of the technical side, but also the soft skills side, basically including financial literacy and digital skills in these programs. And then for the workers' perspective, it's basically that we look into the role of women across all the different areas of the value chain. So it's not only as operators, but also on the design stage. The issue of battery reuse and recycling is sort of a new job area that now it's not tapped right now, but can be tapped in the future. Change legislation for fair work environments, and sort of in general, the just tradition of fair and decent work. And then lastly, the recommendations for entrepreneurs linked to that. It's a new ecosystem. There's new companies coming up, new business models. So I think if we include or sort of be proactive in including half of the population in this whole ecosystem, I think there's also a great opportunity to design better and newer mobility services. And for that, of course, access to financing and also working with the financial sector on how to design gender lens investing and better products for women is very important, and helping also to, for example, now we have established a gender and e-mobility network together with an NGO in Kenya, basically trying to bring women from the sector together, as networks are, of course, very crucial for business development. And I'm going to stop now and just show you the QR code for the where you can download the report. There's also the link here. I think I can also post it in chat if you want to read more. There's also my email if you have questions. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annika. It strikes me just how important your research and your study will become. I noted the notion of gender transformation, gender transformative, and not just talking about gender equality, but actually making it happen. And then also, I think some of the statistics you shared, 20% of women only make up 20% of transport sector workers, only 6% of drivers, only 8% of entrepreneurs or executives of automotive OEMs. It just highlights there's so much work to be done, and the breadth of your recommendations also highlight that. So no, thank you so much for sharing those insights. We will come back to Annika with questions at the end, but now I want to move to our next speaker, Deliani Siregar, who will introduce her national study on gendered aspects of mobility in Indonesia, which form part of that study. So hopefully a deeper dive into the case of Indonesia. Deliani, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Johanna, and also Annika for already giving us a chance to also giving more deep dive information regarding our study that already completed. But now we are still in a finalizing progress in the report, so it hopefully can be launched soon within this year. So yeah, in terms of the things that we already work on about understanding how then Indonesia can accommodate more opportunity for women, and looking for more possibilities for the contribution that can be made by women in the e-mobility. Actually, we look at very interesting data, and we can see that all these findings also parallel or aligned with the national goal or targets. So actually, regarding to the e-mobility landscape in Indonesia, the national government already set a very ambitious target that by 2025, for example, that will have 2.1 million units of electric two-wheelers vehicles and at least about 2,200 units of four-wheelers electric vehicles. And last year, actually, ITDP Indonesia also assisted the Ministry of Transportation to work on a national roadmap on how then the public transportation can be electrified. So by having this kind of like ecosystem in mind, we also wondering about what kind of like things that can be contributed more by women to be later on can actively participate or even more see it as another opportunity. Is it like e-mobility can drive the change for the women participation in transportation? So understanding about, as mentioned by Annika, actually, the study want to see more about what kind of things that already happened on the ground, especially in this case, Indonesia cases. So back then, based on our surveys, we understand that women have a very important role to be an active agent to shift more kind of like mobility into more sustainable mobility, because they are the real actors on ground, even in Jakarta, that led to this kind of like transformations because of they really rely on walking, do cycling, and even they rely on the existence of public transportation system. So by having this kind of like understanding, we also like checked with Transjakarta, happened in Jakarta because they already like do a survey conducted in April 2023, and they understand that the majority of their passengers are women. It's about like 62%. And based on our on-ground surveys on the microbuses passengers, we also understand that there are 65% of the microbuses, or here we call it microtrans. It's about 65% of the passengers are women. So based on this kind of like landscape, then in the study, we would like to see about what kind of like then women as e-mobility users, women as mobility workers, and e-mobility impact on women, and then how then women can play a very important role as a decision maker in the mobility sector for Indonesia case. So it's really interesting to understand that women in Indonesia have a very challenging access to private vehicles. However, in our study, we see it as an opportunity for women to drive the e-mobility shift, especially for the e-2 three-wheelers as well as the e-public transport or e-buses, for instance. So it is very, very, very interesting to see that these kind of like obstacles, because of maybe the challenge as mentioned by Annika to the credit, to give more kind of like a visible financing scheme for women to access the private vehicles, though is it like motorbikes or maybe cars, it gives more opportunity for women to adopt and also shift or to choose the e-2 three-wheelers because of it's cheaper, it's available on market at the moment. It's a very, very large market in Indonesia at the moment. And based on study, actually the motorbike users in Indonesia, they only travel about 1 to 10 kilometers per day. It's about like 30 to 35% of the motorbike users in Indonesia, they only use their motorcycles to travel only 1 to 10 kilometers per day. So by having this kind of like mobility pattern made by women, because women, based on our study as well, we find that they have less kilometers in travel per day. It's about like 3 to 5 kilometers. And for the last miles one, they occupied only 3 to 4 kilometers. So it's really interesting that these kind of like kilometers can be captured by the possibility of adoption, the e-2 three-wheelers. And another kind of like study within this study as well, we note that the road safety, the availability of disaggregated data, and also the possible access to these electric vehicles should be looked forward, because maybe it will also like boost the transition in Indonesia. Because in the previous data or the previous landscape, I already like showed you that here now, national government have a very ambitious target. However, the adoption of EV is a bit slow. But then how we want to see this kind of like as opportunity, we see that this kind of like road safety, the availability of the disaggregated data, as well as to create more accessible infrastructures to the EVs is really something that play an important role. And looking more about women as e-mobility users, as mentioned, actually in other kind of like studies supported by UNEP as well, ITDP in talk with the Ministry of Transportation to make a more clear definition on how to define the e-bikes and what are the e-motorbikes, because of, as I mentioned, the 2-3-wheelers actually can be a very potential things that can be adopted in a very fast, and it will be also boost the access for women on having more access to another kind of like mobility, urban mobility. But however, regarding to the road safety, it's really needed for the Ministry of Transportations and other kind of like regulations to be made, because it will give more kind of like clear definition to differentiate which are the e-bikes, which are the e-motorbikes, because it will like play important role in a road safety. Looking to another kind of like dimension on how then we want to see, is it like also e-mobility can give more opportunity for women join the workforce? We actually find that women face series of challenges in accessing higher education or special education that fit or match the needs in transport sectors. Because of more, though women that can access these kind of like higher education or good education, good quality of education, they may not fit with this kind of like a requirement or recruitment process that already made in transport sectors in Indonesia. Based on our study, actually in Indonesia in 2018, we understand that more of women tend to rely on informal sectors. Women Profile Indonesia surveys conducted in 2018 also noted the same things, because it's about 47% of women in urban Indonesia works in informal sectors without the security. So it's really, really sad to understand that kind of condition. But we see that these kind of like things also can be seen in a positive light, because it will also bring more kind of like opportunities for women joining the workforce. And couple of times before, actually, we also in talks with Transjakarta, the BRT company in Indonesia, in Jakarta, based in Jakarta. When we do disseminate these kind of like findings, they also see that these kind of like bus electrification on how they want to electrify and also align with their goals to do 100% electrification to their buses, it can have opportunity to open wider opportunity for women joining the workforce. So in current landscape for Transjakarta workers, actually in a decision maker, because actually now we have one director work in Transjakarta, which is also very, very keen to work this kind of like environment. And they only like now still small number presented in Transjakarta. However, they also committed to have more kind of like women to be participated in Transjakarta, because as I mentioned again, there are a number of opportunities once they shifted the bus from the IC bus to the e-buses, and looking forward more kind of like trainings, workshops that can be provided to skill up and also give more kind of like chances for women to the participation in these kind of like opportunities. Well, yeah, those now we have a very limited number of women participating in Transjakarta, but actually Transjakarta itself plans to increase the female employees to 30%. And it's not only about the staff who works in a services, maybe onboard service or onboard staff, no, but they also look more kind of like these opportunities on recruit more e-bus drivers coming from the women. But to understand this kind of like things, actually we see, and also we talk with UNEP to do more and further study and also collaborate with Transjakarta to looking more this kind of like chances to be applied. So on how we provide a very, very comprehensive understanding on how the HR can support the possibility of women joining the workforce, and also how the Transjakarta can start a pilot class, for example, to let more women joining the system. And regarding the infrastructures, actually, in Indonesia, we are struggling to still work on developing the charging, the battery swapping standard, and to be able to adopt this kind of like have a very smooth transition, because we also see that as mentioned before by Annika, there are a number of the strategies that we look for and we assisted For example, now Transjakarta, they targeted to electrify 100% of their microbuses by 2030. And by having this kind of like microbuses, actually, it will also give more chances because these microbuses will pass the smaller routes and next to houses. The service area of Transjakarta into 8 to 82% of Jakarta already covered by the services. So by doing this kind of like electrification, actually not only giving more senses to the impact for the services itself, but also to women participations, or even more maybe the air quality improvement that can be impacted to these vulnerable groups. And to understand in other kind of like side, we see that these kind of like e-mobility can also give more kind of like chances on another business, another economic opportunities, because of we in Indonesia here, we are still in many discussions about doing financial unblock on how then the bike can be rental, or even like how then the women easily use and participate in using the e-bikes or e-motorbikes, so it can enhance the opportunity to join the another economic opportunities, maybe like for the logistic, for example. So these kind of like things, we also see that the battery swap businesses now there are in many neighborhoods, many women participate in their house. They put their kind of like battery swap station. So this kind of like another emerging businesses that we should like look into. And also this kind of like participation also tailored with another regulations made by the government regarding the low emission zones and so on and so on. So as the conclusion actually in study, we would like to see and say that these kind of like e-mobility can be an entry point for another of future inclusive, as well as the active contribution and participation coming from women and other vulnerable groups. But also we see that women will play roles into being an actor that will shift or even more maybe accelerate this kind of like transformation by participating within this environment or ecosystem, e-mobility ecosystem. And we also know that within these kind of like things, it's really important to highlight that e-2 three-wheelers as well as e-buses, e-public transportation will be noticed as two important sectors that should be seen as an entry point to work with these kind of like opportunities. So yeah, I think that's all for me. Back to you, Tom. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Deliani. That was a really interesting and insightful presentation there, and I noted some opportunities for promoting greater participation of women within the E2 three-wheeler segment, which I think is really interesting, and also I think great to see that Transjakarta have committed to a target of 30% on female employees within their workforce, which is also really good to see. Thank you so much. We will transition towards the Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes or so left in the session. If I can encourage people to post any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, I can see that they're starting to come in already. So thank you so much for those. And Annika, if I could invite you back to the room as well, and we'll take questions jointly. And Annika, I don't know if you're still there, but I see. Fantastic, thank you. It struck me in your presentation that you had so many kind of recommendations and cut for different actors and different sort of stakeholders. I mean, with so many recommendations, I guess where do we start? What's the kind of low-hanging fruit, perhaps, that maybe that governments can take to start to promote greater participation of women within the transport sector, and more representative and inclusive transport systems as a result?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I think there's not really a low-hanging fruit, but I think it all starts, what we said before, with the data collection and being aware that there are different needs for different genders in the transport sector. Because I think if you don't recognize these different needs, you don't really would implement any of these recommendations. Basically, I think that's definitely within sort of the mandate of governments, and they can, of course, in their own managed transport, household service, transport data collection, they can do that, but they can also sort of put in place rules for private companies, basically on that they have to share these sort of gender discriminated data with them if they want to operate in a certain city, right? And I think that's sort of the first step. And I think the second one is, as you said before, many of these other recommendations depend on women having the right skills to enter the sector. So I think that's where we need to start in order to address all these sort of subsequent recommendations. And that's why you have to start now, because you're not gonna, it needs time to build up skills. So I think that is sort of the time now to sort of work with educational institutes to make the curriculum on the one side e-mobility proof, and then at the same time sort of gender proof, and sort of try to also with their own capabilities break these sort of biases or stereotypes that women, are not suitable for transport sector jobs. Yeah, I don't think those are low-hanging ones, but I think those are the first ones.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do, isn't there? Clearly. Thank you so much. And a question to both of you, really. I'm conscious that you've both been working in the area of gender and transport for some time. Was there anything through your latest research that sort of surprised you, or that you weren't expecting to see, that was particularly interesting, that kind of brought that sort of new insight, I guess? I don't know who wants to. Deliani, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, maybe this kind of like a thing that surprised me, three-wheelers can be another kind of like entry point, because we actually like really do not see it coming, because of maybe the infrastructure is not that kind of like well at the moment in Indonesia cases. But then to see that the markets already demand for more kind of like things, but then the rise of, because of it's like very rapid adoption for especially e-bikes and also mopeds. But then the way then the regulation is not responsive toward it, it's something that we should like anticipate. So by having these kind of like findings, though it's not only talking about them or women as users, but also to see that these kind of like environments, for example, in battery sectors, we also look more kind of like opportunities to engage women to work and also participate within the field is also kind of like something that not explored yet by the government. But to see that this is a very interesting opportunities to look into is something that I feel it good and should be followed up.
Thanks, Deliani. I see the questions are still coming in, and we've got one from Mark Chatena. Mark says, thank you, Annika, for sharing the learnings and policy insights from your research. Could you share more about the UNEP e-mobility gender working group, its purpose or objectives perhaps, or who the stakeholders are and how to contribute?
Yeah, with pleasure. Yeah, sure. So we launched it actually last year at the International Transport Forum. So it's basically trying to get both experts and practitioners in the field from sort of as many sort of countries globally together. It's a bit of a loose setup right now, and I have it sort of on my to-do list to sort of revive it and get it to steel. But the task would basically be in general to, on the one side, when we do now new reports and publications on this topic, that they can review, provide peer reviews and sort of insights. But also, for example, if in certain countries, so in many of our e-mobility countries, and probably similar with ADB, we often want to hire consultants to do certain work. Can we also recruit people from these sort of gender expertise to do these consultancies, to be able that, or to ensure that gender is sort of included in these e-mobility projects. And then, as I said before, also this networking, so connecting people working on gender and e-mobility across the globe to sort of advance the knowledge. And people that want to join this working group are very welcome to send me an email, and I'm happy to share sort of more information and invite to the next working group meeting.
Thank you, Annika. And Deliani, a question to you. So in terms of the target of 30% of female employees for Trans Jakarta, How do they propose to do that? How do they ensure that women will be employed at managing and directing positions as well as sort of, I guess, more operationally focused positions?
Well, yeah, Tom, actually the target or even more the commitment on fulfilling these kind of like 30% is actually not clear yet made by Transjakarta. However, we'll see, and we already like talked with them and also talk with UNEP as well to do the follow-up, because of it's kind of like opportunity to see the full HR or human resources that kind of like, or even like the management for letting more people or letting more women participating in the workforce, Transjakarta workforce. So to see it coming from Transjakarta and their willingness to exploring about how that they can make it possible, not only to hire e-bus driver, women or female e-bus driver, but also to let more kind of like participation can be made in a managerial to directors kind of like level of stuff. It's also something that we want to see and explore more after this study actually. So to see this kind of like possibilities that can be made by Transjakarta, or even more, they started the discussions already. We see this kind of like in a positive light, and actually Transjakarta also managed to have this kind of like initial setup. So they want to build this kind of like Transjakarta Academy, where later on they will do more kind of like, trainings, workshops, and let people that will work in BRT ecosystem can participate. And these kind of like well-educated or certified graduates that they can like also deploy to other cities. So make more kind of like opportunities for women, not only work in Transjakarta, but other BRT system in other cities in Indonesia.
Yes, super. Thank you, Deliani. And we have another question come in. So anonymous, what does the findings that show different rider behaviors across genders mean for your engagement of policymakers or OEMs? Deliani, if maybe you can take that one.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, we do interviews number of women when we talk about, is it like something, is there any kind of like things that they will do or is still hesitant to shift to the e-mobility ecosystem? They also like notes this kind of like accessibility in participating in e-mobility. So one case is when we do this kind of like, maybe as a worker, for example, they note that number of not only behaviors or even like the availability of jobs itself, but then how, for example, they access the driving license. So these kind of like findings actually can be also delivered to the policymakers, so they understand how that they can be ready or even more kind of like to improve the services or driver license to be more accessible for women. Is there any kind of like maybe incentive that can be given for the OEMs actually regarding the models? So because of like in Indonesia, we also understood by interviews that these kind of like it's very unique though, because of like the available models for the e-bikes and also mopeds as well as the e-motorbikes actually considered as a feminine models, but then the way of then these kind of like available models to be bought by men, actually it's not something that favor them, as it's not a model that will be used by men. So it's really unique. But to talk with the OEMs, they really see that's why that women also another vulnerable groups as a very potential growth market, because they can produce more and more models that can be used by women because of maybe regarding the size, regarding the battery capacity, and so on and so on. So these kind of like findings and behavior made by women also led to another kind of like typicals where the infrastructures for the battery swapping, for example, or the charging stations could be placed, for example. So these kind of like things we try to deliver to them, to communicate with the policymakers as well as the OEMs or another kind of like private sectors to work in hand in hand to provide these kind of like whole ecosystem for the e-mobility.
Thank you, Deliani. And we have a further question. I believe this relates into your presentation. So notes that on a slide you shared on the gender segregation, on the use of different travel modes and types, why was it that two of them had no or very little usage by women? I don't know if you're able to take that one.
So yeah, based on our study, it's identified that women and other vulnerable groups has a number of challenges regarding accessing the private motorbikes or even cars, because of like in one household, for example, so it happens that for the first private vehicles that will be owned by the family, these kind of like vehicle will be given to the breadwinner, which is like the man, the father, the yeah. Then the second, if they have this kind of like another opportunity or additional money on pocket, they will buy the second vehicle, and these kind of like second vehicle will be given to the son, the eldest son. So by these kind of like situation, norms, habits, and also these kind of like social structures that also led to this kind of like travel behavior made by women. So women have a less tendency to travel with the private vehicles, motorized private vehicle, and also because of it's very difficult for women to apply, even like for the single women, for example, to apply for credits to buy properties, which is like including the transport modes. So they have a very high reliability to active mobility or public transportation. So that's why they have a less preference on use the other modes of travel mode.
Thank you, Deliani. And if we just take one very final question from the audience, and Annika, if maybe I can put this one to you. So as part of your study, what knowledge gaps did you identify for future research? For example, what knowledge gaps that would be kind of key to filling?
Yeah, I mean, there's several, but I think one really interesting part would be to quantify what would be the benefits if more women would work in e-mobility, basically on all these different levels. So really putting into place numbers, because what we see right now, that often these sort of gender inclusion comes as donor requirements. You see, for example, the JEF, they have, it has to be all gender sensitive or mainstreamed or whatever. We see, for example, we have supported a couple of companies to subsidize women to acquire EVs, or in general provided grants basically for these e-mobility companies to include more women in their workforce or subsidize their training, because they wouldn't do it by themselves, because of course they are commercial businesses. They are already struggling, to access financing at the beginning. So it doesn't seem to, at the moment, make commercial sense to include women. But I think there is a potential, as you see, I mean, as I said before, women are half of the population. So if you have sort of a broader customer base, it can, of course, help you to be more profitable. I think if we have I'm sort of confident if we have more women in decision-making positions, we'll make better decisions on transport planning. That will make the whole system more effective. Many hours are lost in traffic in most cities in the world, basically. There's lots of lives lost in road accidents, which often involve male drivers. There's lots of, health disbenefits from air pollution, which is, can be mitigated by sustainable modes of transport, which, as we said before, there's a tendency that women choose lower carbon transport modes. Again, like these policy development around gender inclusion, I think also if we design it for women, it's usually also better for the elderly and for kids and maybe for disabled people, to just making the transport sector more inclusive. And I think what is needed, sort of collect data and make maybe some analysis on what would be sort of the financial benefits of that, because money rules the world. So I think that could be very exciting to look into. Thanks.
Super, thanks, Annika. I see just one very final question, if I may put this before we do close this up. So, Annika, this is to you. Thank you for sharing your insights from your research. Could you expand more on the findings on productive usage of EVs by women for enhancing earning? Are there initiatives to spur the same in Uganda and Kenya?
Yes, that's actually a great point. So we focus in most of the project on actually vehicles as productive use of energy, basically. So using these vehicles, so we have supported on the one side e-mobility companies that have recruited women to use electric vehicles as delivery riders. So basically the electric vehicle is their main source of income, because they would deliver food products within cities. We are now setting up a pilot projects for women to become electric bicycle riders, to distribute pharmacy and medical goods basically. And then the other, I think, interesting is the link with agribusinesses. So in Kenya, we're working with a company to have women be sort of commercial drivers of electric three-wheelers. And on the one side, they can use these three-wheelers sort of to provide transportation as a service. So whatever sort of people need to move goods, so they could hire sort of a women electric three-wheeler rider to provide, the service on the one side. On the other side, also for themselves, many women sort of provide food for markets. So helping them basically with the electric three-wheeler to get the produce from the villages and the fields to the main markets. And then the other interesting one is, for example, Lake Victoria, we are thinking about a project of having electric three-wheelers delivering ice for fish. So to keep the fish cool, basically, and then deliver it again also to markets. And three-wheelers are sort of a very, good mode of transport because they're easy to ride. They're sort of safer because they have more wheels and stuff. And so that's like a few ideas around that topic. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Annika, and thank you both. I'm conscious of we have run slightly over our allotted time. We did start slightly later, so hope that's all equals out. But I'd just like to finish by thanking you both for your time, for coming to present to us today, and for sharing the insights from your work. And Annika, I see that your report has been circulated by Johanna in the chat box as well. So hopefully people can pick it up there, and I'm sure it'll be circulated around after as well, along with the presentation. So thank you for presenting to us today, and thank you to the audience as well for coming along and for asking some really interesting questions there. And I know that there've been some really good responses to those questions. So this presentation will be recorded. It has been recorded, and the recording will be circulated after. It will be uploaded to ADB's YouTube channel and also the platform website once that's up and running over the coming months ahead. And we hope that we'll see you next week. As Johanna said at the top of the session, we've got a webinar coming up next week on a case study on Bangladesh and enabling electric vehicle adoption from Arif Faisal. So that'll be same time, same place. And we'll hopefully look forward to seeing you there. So thank you, everybody, and have a very pleasant rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone. Thank you, Annika. Thank you, Deliani.